Joshi, our pup over there, welcomes everyone to the Emergent Human podcast, where we explore optimizing human health, embodied spirituality, and post-conventional living. I'm Michael Osterling, a somatic educator, executive coach, and transpersonal guide, and I'm your host. I briefly want to do a shout out to my friend, former U.S. Navy SEAL Chris Smith, who has a new training program, an online training program called Trident Mindset. Trident Mindset is an online mindset training program created by SEALs, intelligence operatives, and neuroscientists. You can learn more at www.tridentmindset.com. Today's show is brought to you by Somatic Psychotherapy Today. Our guest is Ruth Culver, who's going to speak about her Survive Thrive Spiral System, which integrates internal family systems and polyvagal theory. A little about Ruth. Ruth is a somatic psychotherapist based in Brighton, UK. She works with adults and teenagers in groups and individually with a particular interest in trauma, attachment, and resilience. She uses internal family systems model of psychotherapy, known as IFS, and often integrates it with other embodied and creative processes, including constellations and intuitive drawing. It's great to see you, Ruth. How are you today?
Thank you. Well, it's an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Certainly. I'm very excited to talk about your spiral, which integrates these two really interesting systems. But before we go down that path, tell us about how you personally became interested in living inside of your body, and then how did that turn into a profession for you?
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny. I think if anybody had seen me from the outside, Michael, they would have thought I was fairly embodied, maybe, unless they kind of knew about these things. Because I looked like a vibrant, active person doing moving, dancing, but the level to which I was dissociated on many, on many kind of, in many areas, it was hidden to me. So yeah, I just pushed myself until I fell over, and then I had to get interested. I got sick. I got chronic fatigue syndrome and all sorts of, things that go alongside that when your body just says no, stop.
When did this happen for you?
Well, it was kind of gradual. I think I was became a bit of a workaholic through my 20s and 30s, and my health just went down and down, and eventually I was still carrying on my work from my bed. I got one of these special tables that covered
Wow.
my legs that I could use my laptop whilst lying down, and I was just keep going, keep going, keep going. So yeah,
Right.
I got sick, and then I started really looking for things that could help because regular medicine wasn't going to help me. And I really got interested in hypnotherapy originally. That was the first thing that helped. And I got to really understand that the mind and body are as one. It's not just that they're linked, they're as one. They reflect each other. They're kind of Siamese twins almost. So I just got more and more interested in it. And I guess it's probably been 15, 18 years or something that I've been on this journey now, and more and more fascinating every day.
So one of the first things I heard you say is hypnotherapy as a way to kind of help mind body practices to change your condition.
Yeah.
What other therapies or technologies or tools or techniques did you investigate as part of your attempt to recover and heal yourself?
Yeah. Well, I did the usual thing. First of all, you go to the regular doctors, and when they can't help, you go to more kind of naturopaths, and that kind of supported me. But until I dealt with what was driving me, that drive, and I'll talk a little bit about this later when we get onto the spiral, that kind of um, push, the go stop thing that's happening in the body of someone with chronic fatigue. Parts of us are pushing us go go go, and other parts going stop. You just gotta stop doing this. And when you don't understand what embodiment is, because it's not a cognitive understanding, it's an embodied understanding. I mean, it's like saying describe a taste. Well, I don't know. I've never even tasted the thing, so how can I describe the taste when it's never been in my mouth? So the discovery is takes a while. Yeah.
How did this exploration turn from a personal exploration to
Mm.
heal yourself into a
Yeah.
professional one for you?
Yeah, so I suppose I looked into, slightly answering a previous question, I looked into NLP, and I looked into, then led to hypnotherapy, and that really helped me. And because I'd had to give up my job in event management, I was a super um, perfectionist working in charities and the arts where there's never enough people to do the job. So I was always doing two or three people's work. And once I could no longer do that, I had to find another kind of line of work. And I was just good at telling stories. So hypnotherapy came really easily. And that I could do part time, and gradually it's become more and more. I've looked at lots of different things. I've done so many CPD trainings in embodied areas and creative things and gestalt and transaction analysis, and all sorts of little bits and bobs have come into my toolbox through various different trainings. But it was really when I found internal family systems that everything fell into place. All that I've been trying to do, trying to understand how a system would work that really satisfied me and was trauma aware. That's when it all fell into place.
And this might be a nice time if you wouldn't mind explaining a little bit about internal family systems. And I listened to a lecture you gave, and I love the fact you pointed out that is non-pathologizing approach to human growth and development, which I think is really important. So if you wouldn't mind just like a brief
Yeah.
overview of IFS, that'd be great.
Yeah. So IFS was created probably about 40 years ago by a guy called Richard Schwartz. He was working in family therapy, and he was working with the external family system, so different members of the family, and how a problem, different members, different people in the family would all react in different ways to create the one issue. And he short story, but basically found that he needed to work with the internal parts of people. And these parts type therapies, psychosynthesis, gestalt, there's different parts type therapies around. That he kind of built on that, but he also took things from focusing, so paying attention to the body, very
Mhm.
somatic, from somatic experiencing, from uh, Gestalt, and all sorts of different aspects of. He's kind of cherry picked really good stuff from lots of different therapies and put it together in a beautiful um, select self-connected, universally connected way of understanding the human um, mind and the human personality. And multiplicity is really at its core. So we all have many parts. It'd be so normal you think, well, shall I take this new job they're offering me? There's a part of me that can't be bothered. I quite like the old one. It's easy. There's another part that I really wants to get on and achieve. And there's another part that thinks, oh, well, dad'll be really proud of me if I do. And, so this is so normal. We all have many parts. And so people with multiple personality disorder are just somewhere further along the scale, further along the spectrum, where the parts have had to become more extreme, take on extreme roles. So he has this view that of multiplicity, and once you start seeing it that way, you realize that the part of us that say numbing us out and making us stay in bed because we're so depressed, or the
Mhm.
part that's running around, my part was like, you got to do this right, do more, work more, work more. That part is just an over adaptation. It's gone a little extreme as a result of the way it got programmed to work. And so it's not that someone has depression or anxiety, it just means that part is running, or those parts. In the case of something like manic depression, you're swinging between
Yeah.
different parts. Um, and chronic fatigue, I mentioned earlier, you've got the part that's go, 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 and other parts going stop, stop, stop. It results in chronic fatigue. That's the ultimate um, collapse that happens, but it's the parts who are running the show, and it's the fight between them. So yeah, going back to your question, um, it's a non-pathologizing model. We don't say you're psychotic or you've got multiple personality disorder or you've got depression. It's just that there are depressed parts, there are numbing parts, there are parts that feel hopeless. Those are the ones that are taking over. And it's so beautiful to do the work, to work with these parts one by one. And they respond, they relax, they
Mhm.
don't really want to do these jobs.
You kind of already answered this partially, but let me ask you for a kind of a deeper dive. What was your personal takeaways from diving into IFS in terms of your own growth and development, generally speaking, but also specifically to the challenges that you're facing?
Yeah, well, it's ongoing. You actually view this as a lifelong thing. It's like physical health, mental health. You always have to be working with it to stay healthy. But when you've got some things to unwind, you have to work a bit harder. If you've got an injury, you do some physiotherapy. So it's ongoing for me, but I think that the core of IFS is self-compassion.
Mm.
We're not about fixing stuff. So on top of all these parts, the thing that Richard Schwartz brought in was this essence of self. Now, self doesn't do anything. It's like the witness, the parent, the kind of being with. It's a being, not a doing. So all our parts will be busy doing things, but this being element of us, it's kind of a mixture between soul and spirit. And it can be with whatever painful or overactive parts are doing their thing. And they get to relax when they feel this universal core essence, this beautiful, calm, curious, compassionate element of that's within us all. And we can get more and more contact with that. So that's the personal growth. As we get more awareness and contact with our self energy, so all the extreme parts start to relax. The parts holding trauma, which Richard Schwartz called exiles, its feelings have had to be pushed away because they're so painful, they get healed. So my little parts that feel not good enough, that maybe were the first time I did a podcast, but terrified that it's about people will judge me, and they're a lot calmer than they used to be. And it's the parts that maybe would make me run around doing lots of homework and trying to get it right, they're a lot calmer. So they're more in connection with self. You're kind of more inner flowing. You can express your feelings and needs, and the space then for more creativity, individuation, growth, intimacy, spontaneity, as a result of healing the exiles that got locked away, and contact with what Schwartz calls protectors, which are all the doing parts that either shut things down, run away, collapse, or run around madly trying to fix stuff.
So a couple of things I hear. One, just when you're talking about kind of the self, mindful, core self, inner knowing, soul, mindfulness. It's interesting because it sounds like almost every and any spiritual system would fit nicely within IFS. Like
Yeah,
it's
that's
non-denominational in that sense of kind of getting into the essential nature of the human being.
Yeah, people with strong religious feelings don't usually have a problem with IFS at all. I haven't encountered it myself. It, as you say, it fits alongside, but it's not the same self as, say, in Buddhism, or it's slightly different because this one is. It's not about letting go and observing. It's about real compassionate
Contact.
connection.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
it's
it's much
about
more relationship based.
yeah, very relational. It's like an
Okay.
internal co-regulation, you know.
Got it.
I'm here with you. I'm here with you.
And it sounds like it's an interesting model, kind of integrating transpersonal theory and somatics. Because I would imagine like these different voices or personalities or subpersonalities, they have somatic components to them. Like
Yeah.
there's a breathing pattern, an energetic pattern, a posture pattern. Is that accurate?
Yeah, different ways in with different folks. Some people talk much more about their emotions.
Mm,
That's how they access, that's how their parts express themselves. But other people will be much more somatic. They'll come out in migraines, in back
mm.
pain, and I don't know if you know John Sarno's work.
Yep.
He wrote this book, I Can Heal Your Back Pain. It's so often it's suppressed anger. And so, of
Mm.
course, that's an emotion that got stored in the body. So yeah, somatics are a wonderful way in, and we might get very curious about any chronic pain or illness, and they often have lots of information. I had a client, she had terrible back pain, and she had all sorts of surgeries to try to correct it, but it was only when we traced it back and really listened to and talked to this pain that it told us what it was holding. It did not want to let go of a friend who died. It
Oh,
was like holding the grief. So mostly it's anger, but for this particular person, it was about, I'm not going near that grief. It will kill me. And that was what that part felt. So we had to work gently with the part that was holding all that grief.
strikes me as I think as Jung who said, resist persists, and it sounds like this approach is almost the exact opposite as a instead of resisting or opposing these voices and trying to like, exile them,
Yeah.
which will never work, it just makes them louder, I would imagine. You're actually trying to befriend them in a certain way and change the relationship dynamics, but still have a relationship with them. Because I would imagine that they originated out of goodness. Like it was there's a need that you had really perceived to protect yourself in some situation
Yeah.
from in utero till early childhood or somewhere. Um, that maybe that voice or that personality subtype maybe doesn't serve you as well now the way it's relating to you, but it served you at one point. Is that would that be an accurate way of kind of
Yeah,
thinking about it?
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how they come into being. If mom or dad is really stressed and always yelling at you, you might find the best way to manage is to go quiet,
Mm-hmm.
to really not ever speak up and ask, or to be a people pleaser or super helpful or a perfectionist or high achiever. So the ways that you survive, you make things as manageable as possible in early years will become what we think of as a personality. It's actually who we think we are, but then we start to discover what we are underneath that. And it is very spiritual once we connect to that amazing um, essence, which is not about doing.
Yeah, and actually, that's might be a nice segue because you also integrate polyvagal theory, and there's a nice parallel between finding safety and connection, I am with self, and we'll walk through the model that you've created. But now might be a nice time if you could kind of briefly explain polyvagal theory, but also contextualize in your own life. Like so you learn IFS. How did polyvagal theory come into your world? How did it help you in your own inner work? And then how did you integrate it into your work as a therapist?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I was studying to facilitate Constellations process, which is a really amazing somatic, um, unifying, kind of weird, but also so provable. You just get this incredible information. I'm not going to go into it, but anyway, anybody who knows about constellations knows what I'm talking about. So I'm studying to do this, working with internal parts, particular type of constellation, working with internal parts. But I kept seeing and experiencing for myself people being completely overwhelmed. So
Mm,
there was I working with as a therapist, trying to learn this thing, thinking, hang on, we're supposed to be working with trauma, but people are being re-traumatized. There's nothing regulating this contact with traumatized parts or these very strong survival mechanisms. I mean, for example, the inner critic, that's one of the
mm,
strongest ones, that one who just hammers away at us. And it can be very painful to experience the shame that when you come into contact with the shame that's being created as a result of internalizing this critical voice that of course is, as you say, trying to help. It's really trying to make you not mess up so
mm,
that you don't hurt more, but it's becomes a vicious cycle. So I saw this and got very interested in what was happening in people's bodies. Being able to start to spot when I was facilitating when people were maybe their eyes were glazing
mm,
over or they were um, uh, hyperactive. Really not grounded. When they've left their grounded essence. And then I think through one of my amazing teachers, I came across polyvagal theory, and it just fell into place once I started introducing my workshops with, oh, look, if we notice where we are on this polyvagal, I was using the window of tolerance at the time, the window of tolerance model where you've got this kind of nice resilient space in the middle where you're kind of okay. You can have feelings, but they're not overwhelming. And on the window of tolerance, either you go up into hyperarousal, where you're kind of in fight flight, or you go down underneath into hypoarousal, where you're more shut down and you've gone numb or blank. And it just didn't make sense to me that you would go through resilient place to get from hypo to hyper. That doesn't make any sense. So then yes, same sort of time I found polyvagal and this is a different shape. And that's where this spiral came in, that we're spiraling up out of ourselves and we can spiral back down. So just to explain that, shall I do that, Michael? To
yes,
kind
no,
of
that'd be great. Yeah,
yeah.
definitely.
because
please.
people can download the spiral free from my website, but if you if you the bottom is green, which in the UK, I don't know, some countries are not like this, but in the bottom section, you've got this green flow state where you can feel I can, and everything's in connection. Even the protectors who are trying to do things to make things okay for you, they're in balance, they're in discussion, they're members of an orchestra who can listen to each other and not take over, you know? But then if you get super activated, you'll go into fight flight. And yeah, we need to sometimes. We need to be able to run away or hide to save ourselves. If that doesn't work, the only choice is to go even further into a kind of freeze, collapse sort of space in the nervous system, in terms of the nervous system. And that on my chart is red, which is kind of stop. Yeah, it's like just everything just stops. So I was working with how people could notice this happening in their bodies, what the signs are, where we maybe hang out. Many of us will have a second home, you know. Those of us who haven't developed resilience, haven't learned to hang out in the green zone for our lives, because we learn that from our parents, of course, you know, or our caregivers. Their ability to self regulate their system teaches the baby to self
Mhm.
regulate their system and the young child. That's how we learn it. So if we don't learn it, we might end up living our lives in the amber or the red zone.
Would you say it starts in utero as opposed to post birth?
Yeah, well, I would say the learning to regulate is post birth. That's kind of part of the developmental process, especially for the first 2 years. But the being sent into a state of hypervigilance or shutdown, yeah, that could definitely start in utero because, of course, the baby is being exposed to the same hormones as the mother.
Mhm.
So if she's full of cortisol and adrenaline, that baby's going to get it too. If the baby senses that the world isn't safe, um, then they'll react in whatever way they can to either
Mhm.
shut down, numb out, or be absolutely hypervigilant. Yeah.
I would wonder, and I don't know if there's any clinical evidence either way, if a baby inside of the mother has the eggs that will eventually become the baby's kids, down the road. So I'm wondering, as the baby is affected by the mother's experience, would the egg within the baby have be influenced in some way or another by the mother's to baby's experience?
Yeah, there is increasing research on this. Rachel Yehuda's done quite a lot of interesting
Yeah.
work with Holocaust survivors
Hmm.
and the 9/11. A lot of babies and mothers tracked then. It's in the Bible. The sins of the father should be visited unto the seventh generation. We know there was transgenerational transmission, and the whole discussion of nurture or nature is very much up in the air once we realize there's this going on. Yeah.
All right, so Polyvagal gave you some insights into where your clients were, how they were experiencing life inside themselves, whether they're freezing, fight, flight, self-regulating, or kind of in a I am soulful, relaxed, non-doing space. So it kind of gave you a model for that, is what I'm hearing, to better
Yeah.
understand where they are.
Yeah. And it's also beautifully de-shaming because when you get that, say, the part of you that maybe overeats or self-harms, when you get that that part has a positive intention, that it was trying to help you
Mhm.
keep away, because the protector's job is to keep away the bad feelings from being refelt
Mhm.
or re-triggered. Just like I don't want to feel that. I don't want to feel what that feels like again. I don't want it replicated, and I don't want to have to even process it because just keep it away. That's their job. So once you realize that, part of the self-harming is like just trying to help and you get into conversation with it, find out what it needs in future, then IFS has this beautiful dialogue process of you just converse with your parts, and you find out what they're worried about, what they would like to help them. um, they often think you're much younger than you really are. They still think you're the age that they started doing it, and they lead you to help uh, heal the young parts that they've spent all this time protecting. Yeah, and then of course then they can relax and chill out.
Nice. I would imagine just as IFS is non-pathologizing, polyvagal is too, because listen to you speak, if someone's um, hypo-aroused or fight or flight freeze, wherever they are, it's adaptive. It's not pathological.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's adaptive. And that's the good news. Okay, so maybe we didn't get to learn to be able to self-regulate or even co-regulate. Maybe even other people are so dangerous for us because of how our early life was that we can't at the moment co-regulate. Just understanding it, um, both in an embodied way, experiencing that we do move through different states. Even the most stuck people get experience of different states, so there's some hope comes there, and knowing that it's a way our body's trying to help us survive. So de-shaming. It's like, oh, it's not my fault.
Mm.
This is what I had to do subconsciously. It happened to help me survive, and then we can start building up um, the contact with our own self energy, this flow state. And polyvagal allows us to understand about safety, connection with others, sometimes maybe just connection with nature is the first way in to feel safe, and then connection with others, connection with self, so that the sense of safety is built gradually. And yeah, the wonderful news is we can repattern the brain.
So let me ask you that. So when I read about what you do, you work with individuals, groups, teenagers as well, which is a whole alien life form. Good for you. Um, but I'm curious, like when you're working with an individual or working with a group of folks, and any one person might be in a freeze or fight or flight space, what other tools and exercises, technologies, interventions do you do to help them regulate themselves so that then they can deal with the sub personalities, perhaps?
Yeah.
Because I would imagine, like, if they're disassociated or they're frozen or they're fight or fighting, they're not really in a headspace or a somatic space to start dealing with these internal conversations very well.
Yeah, that's right. I use a lot of externalization with people who are with a lot of trauma, a lot of hypervigilance or shutdown. Externalization works beautifully. So it could be just using objects. If I'm some of the teenagers, I'm walking on the beach with them. We pick up stones and sticks
Nice.
and pick up something for your angry part or whatever, and we just do it with a little bit of play, which is really
Okay.
nice. With a lot of people, I use this drawing process which I've developed called drawing into self, and it's a way of just instinctively connecting to things. So if someone brought a situation, for example, shouting at my kids, then say, okay, yeah, so this part that shouts, you kids, where do you feel that in your body? Oh, it's this rush that rises up through my chest. And if it had a color, what color would it be? Oh, it'd be red. Okay, grab a red and now put it on the paper. And we use these big pieces of paper. So the energy starts going on the paper. So it comes like out of the body. And then we start the IFS. How do you feel towards that red part? Oh, well, I hate it or I'm ashamed of it. There we go. We've just
Okay.
unblended by putting it on the paper. So
Nice.
the paper is used as a way to release the grip, if you like, of these parts taking over. And then they get the self energy with them of starting to do the conversation. So yeah, externalizing, sometimes through movement. Sometimes we don't use a lot of grounding in IFS, but sometimes it's necessary. Um, if somebody's got a very overwhelmed system, we use grounding processes. And then as soon as we can, we start talking, what's it like for the part that's terrified when you suggest these long out breaths,
Mm,
these long, what's that like for the terrified part when you do that? So you're already setting up self with the terrified part.
mm.
Just do through activities.
How about breath work? I've heard you mention breath. How
Mhm.
does managing or modifying one's breath play into the work that you do?
Yeah, well, it's funny because quite often you go to workshops and things and they say, oh, let's have some long, long, deep breaths. But actually, the understanding of polyvagal is a long breath, it means different things. And depending on where you are, you need a different type of breath. So if you're in fight flight, if you're in the state of I've got to do something, some long out breaths will bring you more into a self-connected ventral vagal state. Some long out breaths. But if you're shut down and you're in a more frozen state, if I can't, long out breaths are just going to put you more to sleep. They aren't going to help you. So this is where you might do a little bit of body movement, or maybe just a few little breaths to like a slight increase in the in breath to bring a bit more aliveness into the system. And again, it's just the right amount so that
Mhm.
people are not overwhelmed. But noticing how using the right kind of breath can change our state, can bring us into more connection with self energy.
If you wouldn't mind, if you could walk through this survive, thrive spiral a little bit, and obviously people can go check it out and listen to your lectures on it, which I think let me encourage everyone to do that and train with you too. But if you could just walk through it so people can see the relationship from I am, I can, I must, I hurt, I can't, self-connected, fixed protectors, exiles, and freeze protectors, the relationship between the IFS and polyvagal,
Yeah.
briefly,
Yeah.
just so people have an idea.
So on the chart, I've got polyvagal on one side and I've got IFS on the other. So polyvagal that's the kind of the autonomic nervous system, which of course is created as a result of experiences. We're none of us the same. And then on the left-hand side, I've got the internal family systems, which is much more the psychological ways of doing and being, our personality and what we're up to in life. And at the center, we got the spiral, and I've got these very, very simple words, which I've been using a little bit. So right at the bottom, you've got I am, and that's self energy, which is, it's not about doing. We're human beings. We do, we do, but we're also beings. It's almost like yin and yang. It's not about masculine and feminine. It's just about, for me, it's about being and doing, and we need both. So we can't live our lives in self, total self, because then we wouldn't do anything. We wouldn't have breakfast. We wouldn't get the kids to bed. So we need parts that do stuff. But if they're self connected, if they're in contact with I am, we can do it in a healthy way that doesn't overwhelm us. We can flow into up the spiral into fight, flight, and freeze if we need to, when we need to. We don't want to get rid of those. But the point is we don't get stuck.
Mhm.
If we had trauma, we may have got stuck up there. But once the whole system is working beautifully, then we will flow in and out of those different states. So the body, we've got I am, which is in connection ideally with I can. So whatever
Mhm.
happens, I can deal with it. My parts can do stuff and I won't get overwhelmed. Then we will get overwhelmed sometimes, then we go into I must, and that's the amber yellow zone, and that's fight flight. I've got to do something. It's a fix zone. I've got to do something to sort this out. If we can't do it, then that's when we end up in the red zone right at the top,
Mhm.
that place of I can't, which in polyvagal terms is called dorsal vagal. It's about collapsing. But it also has, in personality terms, so more in the what we're actually doing as human beings, we might not be fully in dorsal vagal, so we may not have collapsed utterly. We may still be keeping going, but we've kind of, they call it fawning or um, uh, submitting. It's kind of that, well, I can't change this, so I'll just carry on, you know?
Mhm.
I'll
Mhm.
just carry on because I literally can't change it. So it's a kind of hopeless state. It has a very low energy, so it doesn't feel like fight, flight, but there is some adrenaline to get some stuff done. So
Okay.
that's the very top zone. So in the middle of that red zone and that yellow zone, all those protectors, the fight, flight, and the freeze protectors, all doing their thing. So fight, flight, the kind of protectors you might have in fight, flight are things like hypervigilance, criticizing, being perfect, bullying,
Mhm.
obsessions, compulsions. Whereas more in the freeze protectors, you've got depression, being passive, maybe sleeping a lot, um, uh, spiritual bypassing. That's a great freeze. I
Can you?
don't have
Yeah.
to feel anything.
Okay. I was going to
I
ask you to
just,
explain what that is.
yeah, spiritual bypassing. These yogis, like, off I go. I don't mean all of them. I'm a yogi too, but the people who are just so zen that they just leave, but they're not in touch
Mhm.
with reality, with the pain. In fact, Dick Schwartz was talking about this. He was saying, the first idea about spirituality, enlightenment, was that you leave, whereas now we know it's about knowing what that feels like when you leave and being able to bring that feeling back.
kind of like
and integrating
integrating
it.
the ascending and descending paths.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, in the middle of all those protectors, whether they're doing or shutting down, you've got this little circle on my spiral called I hurt, which is where the exiles are. And this is where all the pain is held. So, this is pure reservoir of usually very young parts that have been banished, holding grief or shame, rage. And I'm talking about not the attacking anger, which will be fight, flight. We're talking about that. No, it's not fair. That kind of pure rage that's supposed to be there to protect us, but it often gets banished.
Mm.
So all these things have to get encapsulated, and the protectors keep them away from being hurt or from hurting us, and they stay there. It's like they are in a time capsule.
Mm.
So by having this self connection with them, it's like we send a golden thread to them, and they start to feel our presence. It's inner child work, but it's like gold standard. That's what Bessel van der Kolk called it, that gold standard of inner child work. Yeah.
Let me ask you the role that you play as a therapist within this kind of system that you've integrated and utilized. Because I would imagine for many people who live in I must, I heard, I can't, for a long period of their life, that they don't necessarily have the experience of I am ever, maybe, or maybe very as a state, very short periods of time. Maybe they don't have a lot of self-connected experiences. And so I'd imagine that you as a therapist can kind of play the role using kind of transfers, if you want to use the therapeutic language, we don't have to, of like of a grounded, loving, in your case, mother figure, or could be a man or a father figure, or whatever the person might need. But you play a role for them, and this is a question. I don't know if this is what happens, where they can learn to, through the relationship, trust themselves in a certain way. Does a relationship play any kind of role for you in this work?
Well, it's very, very small in comparison to a conventional psychotherapy.
Okay.
Yes, we will model the self energy because as an IFS therapist, you are always working on your own parts, and
Okay.
that's how we do supervision. It's like working with the parts that come up, and so modeling this connection to self is part of the job, but it's not my relationship with the therapist, with the client. That's the
Okay.
healing thing. Yes, they'll get a bit of that, but basically the whole essence of IFS is about turning that towards themselves.
It's
Like as soon
themselves.
as you can start to do this, and I'll kind of model it for you, and I'll talk you through it. I'll walk you through it. I'll take your hand and walk you through coming into contact with your own self energy, so that it becomes a self to self or a self to part relationship rather than a self to therapist, a part to therapist relationship.
I could imagine that the effects, positive effects down the road would be as if I'm a client of yours and I'm developing healthy relationships to parts of myself. First, I have to recognize there's parts of myself, then I develop healthy relationships to them. That would translate into how I relate to other people too, recognizing that they too have subparts that need to be related to differently. Sound like I'm related to one unique individual. I'm relating to a multiverse individual in front of me, or I don't know what the language you might use, but do you see the effects that once you start working with an individual that it will have on the relationships that they have?
Absolutely. It's the very core of IFS is compassion,
Mm.
and that is turned inward and outward.
Mm.
It just is. It just grows and grows. And so even when people have um, really harmed you or been cruel, forgiveness is irrelevant because you just have understanding. You have
Mm.
compassionate understanding that there were parts running the show, and that those parts have a positive intention. I mean, that's such a beautiful phrase. All parts have a positive intention. Even the ones that you may hate or be ashamed of,
Mm.
they all have a positive intention. And once you find out about your own disliked or disowned parts, positive intention, you're going to see them in other people too.
Nice. So tell us a little bit about your work. Like, how can people work with you individually, or as couples, or families, or teenagers, and your trainings that you offer, things along those lines?
Yeah, well, I love to offer free things because I have a long waiting list. So if you want to learn a little bit more about the spiral and internal family systems, there's a free video as a lecture on YouTube. So that's a good place to start. I run workshops in exploring the spiral for yourself, so kind of experiential. It's a kind of follow-on thing. We do lots of drawing and sharing and co-regulating in groups of about 30 people or something. I don't like to do the huge ones because I like to be in touch with people and get a sense of nervous systems. So I do those as often as I can, and I run these drawing into self online courses. They're 8 weeks long for 8 people. And in that, we do a mixture of group drawing processes where we might explore polarities, where parts really hate each other, like the one who wants to eat all the cake and the one who wants to lose weight, and how, so we kind of have some fun with those. And in that as well, we do one-to-one processes and people witness, and the connection in the group, even on Zoom,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's multicultural, people from all over the world coming in, and there's deep connections by observing each other's IFS one-to-ones through the drawing process, through witnessing each other's process. Beautiful. So I do those every so often. Hopefully in the summer I'll be running some live workshops and retreats, obviously in the UK. And one-to-one, I do a certain amount of one-to-one work, but mostly it's group work these days, which I love. And I'm looking forward to getting back to Constellations, which I stopped doing once we had COVID, because it requires a bit more personal contact. But I'm looking forward to doing
Well, since you brought up constellations twice,
that.
um, could you just briefly explain? It's Hellinger. Is that the
Mm,
creator of his work?
yeah.
Just so people have an idea of one of the other things in your tool kit that you have.
Yeah. Haven't you developed family constellations where you work with the external family system? And people, participants in the group, sort of take on roles. They don't have to have any information about it. They just kind of step into, okay, I'm going to represent your mother or your father, and then they say what instinctively comes to them, which sounds a bit nuts, but we clearly have deep bonds of resonance between us as human beings, because you see it over and over again. And I've done hundreds of them myself. You just open your mouth and something comes out. You don't even know what's going to come out, and it'll be pinpoint accurate. I can remember I was representing somebody. I didn't know anything about this woman's sister. And what came out of my mouth was, let's go to the pub, let's have a drink. And she turned to me and said, my sister's a drunk, a happy drunk. And
Mm.
I was literally skipping around the room going, let's go to the pub. I don't know why I was doing that, but
Uh-huh.
so that's the kind of weird resonance that comes up in constellations. So I actually trained in working with internal parts through the work of Franz Rupert, but now I have that's called identity oriented psychotraumatology. He's German; it's a very
Okay.
German name. I trained in that, but I've actually now completely changed the way I work, and I just use internal family systems. So we're working with the parts of IFS, the dialogue of IFS, the unblending. So it's a way of doing IFS in a 3D way, which is usually layer upon layer upon layer of unblending. And by that I mean, if you bring um, a, a situation such as, well, I'll give the same one, I shout at my kids. The first part that come up might be the rage that you're shouting at your kids, and so somebody takes on that. They just stand in the role as the rage. They don't have to act. They just say what comes up, and it's all kind of fairly low key, but nuggets of pure gold come out. And then after the rage has been unblended, by unblending I mean you're kind of literally stepping out of it and kind of putting it somewhere else out of you. Um, then maybe the shame that I'm shouting at my kids
Mm.
will come up. So we ask somebody to represent the shame. And then after that, there might be a despairing part. I'll never be able to do this right. And then there'll be, and so the unblending is part after part. And then you start to see the constellation. And a constellation, the meaning of that phrase is a collection of parts. A doctor
Mm.
will say, an interesting constellation of symptoms in this patient. Constellation starts, just a collection of parts. So we start to see the parts and how they relate to each other around the room. And then the deep work might start with one part, say the part that's got the most heat in it, or where the client is most drawn, and then we'll do a piece of beautiful repair work as they connect to that part. And
Mm.
then gradually they'll have to get to know the other parts over the coming weeks, months, years, as the whole system starts to shift. Yeah.
Wow. Very cool. What's a website that people can visit to learn more about your work?
My website is calm heart, as in peaceful organ in your chest,
That's
.co.uk.
awesome. Ruth, great to talk to you. I think your model is fantastic. Let me encourage folks to definitely check out your website, watch the video because it's really informative, download the PDF, and sign up for your classes.
Great. Well, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you, Michael.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you too.
All right,
Bye.
bye bye.